Now let's talk about the 16th century, about the American plagues. But first, which are the American plagues? The American plagues are a cluster of Eurasian diseases brought to the Americas by European explorers. Conquistadors brought smallpox among other vicious diseases that decimated indigenous population. The origin of the smallpox is unknown, but the finding of smallpox-like rashes on Egyptian mummies suggests that the smallpox has existed for at least 3,000 years. The earliest written description of a disease like smallpox appeared in China in the 4th century, Common Era. Early written descriptions also appeared in India in the 7th century and in Asia Minor in the 10th century. While smallpox had ravaged population in Asia, Europe, and Africa for millennia, killing 30% of its victims, it decimated the Incas and the Aztecs, who had no immunity, killing upward of 80 to 19% within the first of 1,050 years of the Columbus 1492 visit. Smallpox was a terrible disease. On average, 3 out of 10 people who got it died. People who survived usually had scars which were sometimes severe. This illness contributed to the collapse of the Inca and Aztec civilizations. Some estimates suggest that 90% of the indigenous population in the Western Hemisphere was killed off. The diseases helped a Spanish force led by Hernán Cortés conquer the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1519, and another Spanish force led by Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas in 1532. The Spanish took over the territories of both empires. In both cases, the Aztec and Inca armies had been ravaged by disease and were unable to withstand the Spanish forces. Finally, in the late 18th century, a milkmaid shared some game-changing folk wisdom with English doctor Edward Jenner, that having caught the relatively mild cowpox from a cow, she was immune to smallpox. It took a while, but smallpox was declared officially eradicated worldwide in 1980 following a global vaccination campaign conducted by the World Health Organization.
The third plague, 1855. The third pandemic of plague originated in the area after a rapid influx of Han Chinese to exploit the demand of minerals, primarily copper, in the second half of the 19th century. By 1850, the population had exploded to over 7 million people. Increasing transportation throughout the region brought people in contact with plague-infected fleas, the primary vector between the yellow-breasted rats. Signs and symptoms include fever and chills, extreme weakness, abdominal pain, diarrhea and vomiting, bleeding from your mouth, nose or rectum, or under your skin, shock, blackening and death of tissue in your extremities, most commonly your fingers, toes, and nose. It was an unprecedented plague. For the first time in history and for more than a century, the bubonic plague spread to 5 continents. It became known as the third plague pandemic. It affected citizens such as Hong Kong, Bombay, passing through Sydney, Cape Town, or Los Angeles in different periods. Latin America also succumbed to its effects, passing through Mexico, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. The pandemic left some 12 million deaths and led to the implementation of extraordinary measures to contain them. The 2 previous plague pandemics left societies perplexed trying to find their origins.
Spanish flu 1918. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, the deadliest in history, infected an estimated 500 million people worldwide, about 1/3 of the planet's population, and killed an estimated 20 million to 50 million victims. The 1918 flu was first observed in Europe, the US, and parts of Asia, before swiftly spreading around the world. At the time, there were no effective drugs or vaccines to treat this killer flu strain. So citizens were ordered to wear masks, schools, theaters, and businesses were shuttered, and bodies piled up in makeshift morgues. But what caused the Spanish flu? It was caused by an H1N1 virus with genes of avian origin. Although there is no universal consensus regarding where the virus originated, it spread worldwide during 1918 to 1919. The flu spread to almost every part of the planet within a matter of months. Something that helped the spread of this pandemic was the First World War, thanks to the fact that there were hundreds of troops moving around the world in crowded ships and trains. Spanish flu symptoms. In the first wave of the 1918 pandemic, the sick experienced typical flu symptoms, such as chills, fever, and fatigue. However, later on that year, victims used to die within hours or days of developing symptoms, their skin turning blue and their lungs filling with fluid that caused them to suffocate. But by the summer of 1919, the flu pandemic came to an end, as those that were infected either died or developed immunity. The end of the 1918 pandemic was not, however, just the result of so many people catching the flu and then creating immunity. Social distancing was also key. Public health advice on curbing the spread of the virus was eerily similar to that of today. Citizens were encouraged to stay healthy through campaigns promoting mask wearing, frequent hand washing, quarantining and isolating of patients, and the closure of schools, public spaces, and non-essential businesses. All steps designed to cut off routes for the virus spread. Lastly, did you know that the Spanish flu did not originate in Spain, though news coverage of it did? During World War I, Spain was a neutral country with a free media that covered the outbreak from the start, first reporting on it in Madrid in late May of 1918. Meanwhile, Allied countries and the Central Powers had wartime censors who covered up news of the flu to keep morale high. Because Spanish news sources were the only ones reporting the flu, many believed it originated there.